stewardship. And so I've got notebooks for you to cover every class. You can take it and you can keep it and use it and read along. I will say that if you would like one, and then get one. If you are a couple and you both want one, then take one. The key is you got to be a good steward of it, right? So if you don't need more than one, don't take more than one. But I don't want to see Ricky and Tina fighting over theirs or Robert or Linda. So if you both want one, that's perfectly fine. I've made about 70 for tonight. I think that may have us covered. If you need more, if you find a page missing, let me know. And I'll explain more about that in just a minute. But we can get you more copies or get more copies if we need it. So I'm going to ask all 5 of those young men sitting right there in the middle to come up and help me real quick. Start passing these out. Again, if you both want one, that is perfectly fine. Take 2. If you just want one, then just take one. But we can make more if we need to. It's notes on the chapter, and then there's some questions at the end. So we won't always cover the questions, but you can certainly take them and work through them, and we may see about it as we go. I will try to maybe have a couple of maybe just for the one lesson each week. So if we have visitors and things like that in the future, maybe just give them a copy of that week's lesson. But again, if you'll use it, and I hope that you will, then take it, and we can make more. The way that this works is we purchased a license as the congregation. The elders helped agree to that, of course, for this class. You purchase a license, and it's a PDF document that we can then print as many as we need for class. So we will certainly, Clayton, catch the Harveys or somebody as they come in. We can make more if we need it, and we will gladly give out as many as we need. We just want to try not to print too many extra if we can help it. I do not need one, so I've got the teacher's manual. All right, I got all the lessons. Hold on, Nick. Catch a couple more coming in there before you put them all down. Again, if we miss anybody or you know anybody that comes in next week, let me know and we'll hand it out. This is, as you open it up and notice there, a book that was done by Kyle Butt, which of course many of us know and love, and another man from Middle Tennessee by the name of Brent Spicer, who works with the Spring Meadows Church of Christ around Columbia, Spring Hill area there, who is a financial guy. And so each week there is a video that goes along with the lesson. My goal is to not show the whole video because that can take up the entire class, and then we have very little time for discussion. But hopefully maybe to pick out some segments. We might watch most of it one week. We might watch about 10 minutes. But try to allow us some time to go through some discussion and questions. But for this week to help introduce it, because as we know and love Kyle very much, Kyle does a great job a lot of times telling stories and setting the tone for the class. So this is about 30 minutes, and with the time we have left, we'll have a little bit of discussion at the end. But this goes along with the first lesson in your book. So.
Well, it's that time again. You've got to preach on it at least one time a year. And the preacher stands up. He looks out at the audience. They've warned the audience that this is the day this is going to happen. And he says, preaching on giving, preaching on stewardship. Now, the Bible explains to us we've got to do this because we got to preach the whole counsel of God. I'm sorry about it. It'll be a brief lesson. We'll try to get you out of here before lunch. But let's get into it and work through it. Now, that is what we normally see when we hear people teaching and preaching on stewardship and giving. They apologize for it, and they're sorry they have to do it, and they don't want to, but they explain that it will be as painless as possible, though they insinuate that there's going to be some pain. And then they try to get people excited about giving after an introduction like that. There's no possible way you can introduce a subject like that and expect people to respond in a way that would give this topic the credit and the excitement and enthusiasm that it deserves. The fact of the matter is, stewardship and giving is one of the most exciting, thrilling, fun, and enthusiastic titles and topics that you can discuss. And the reason for that is because it's life-changing. And when I say life-changing, I mean literally life-changing. I'm convinced that if a person decided with a single decision to give in a liberal, generous, scriptural way, that their life would change that day, and they would look back on that day and view it as the day that changed just about everything about their life. And so let me invite you to a discussion of one of the most thrilling topics in the Bible. And when I say thrilling, I mean the Bible talks about stewardship to a great degree. If you were to look at the verses in the New Testament, you would see that about 1 out of every 5 or 6 verses deals with stewardship and money and giving. 1 out of 2 of Jesus' parables discusses stewardship and giving. There are about 1,400 verses on stewardship and giving. And so when you start looking at how important the subject is to God, well, if you're just going to weigh importance based on how much time is spent in print on the subject, what you find out is that God feels that this idea of stewardship and giving is very, very important. And we're going to try to nail down a central truth about giving throughout the course of these lessons. And that truth is found in Acts chapter 20, verse 35. And there in Acts chapter 20, verse 35, you're going to hear Paul say, "And remember the words of our Lord Jesus Christ when he said, 'It is more blessed to give than to receive.'" This lesson series is about blessing. It's about the joy of generosity. It's about how generosity and liberal, generous, scriptural giving can open your life up to what God has always wanted to be giving to you. And so as we look through this, the entire point, I would say, of all of these lessons is the idea that it is more blessed to give than to receive. There was a book that was written a few years ago by a man named Arthur Brooks. And in the book, he wasn't really trying to find out a correlation between giving and happiness and success, etc. He was just really trying to put his finger on, in the United States of America, who gives the most. Is it religious people of faith? Is it politically liberal thinking people, etc.? And he had a thesis that he was trying to flesh out with the book. But what he found to be so interesting was that in every category, the generous, liberal, cheerful givers were people who were happier, they were more financially successful, they were the people who reported a level of contentment with their life to a degree that was not experienced by other people who were non-givers. In fact, what he said was that the nonprofit organizations in the United States of America, they often approach the potential donor and they say, "This is what you can do for us. Would you buy into our program of using funds?" And he said lots of times it was that idea of we're apologizing that we have to ask you for money and that we know this is kind of a one-sided transaction, you giving to us. But what he said was, that was the absolutely wrong approach, and that a nonprofit organization that is using funds to do things that are bigger than the individual, that organization is providing its donors something that they cannot get anywhere else. And that by allowing people to donate to their organization, they are helping those people be happier, be more financially prosperous, be physically healthier, and the nonprofit is offering a service that the donor cannot get anywhere else. And I thought that was an interesting secular take on giving, but what you see is that this is something that is helping the giver. It truly is more blessed to give than to receive. And so when we go to the Bible and we start looking at the subject of giving, we start analyzing what will help us get a grasp of that idea? What will help us view money and stewardship and giving like God views it? What will help us have an attitude and have behavior that will allow God to bless us in the way that He wants to bless us? And you see, probably one of the primary aspects, one of the first ideas is simply the understanding that stewardship is just that. Stewardship. You say, oh, well, thank you, Kyle. That is so profound. You have enlightened us to a great degree. Stewardship is stewardship. Well, what do we mean by that? We mean simply that a steward is someone who doesn't own things. A steward is someone who takes care of things for another person. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, and he said, moreover, that in a steward must be found faithful. Now, what does he mean by that? A steward being found faithful means a person who is the steward of another person's material or financial wealth or money, etc., is someone who takes care of it in a way that the owner would approve of. You know, lots of times I think we approach this idea of money and we think it's ours. We say it's my money and it's my car and it's my house and it's mine. Now, I'm going to show you someone in the Bible that had that idea. When we turn to Luke chapter 12, we find someone that we call the rich fool. Now, let's read the passage in Luke chapter 12 about this individual. In Luke chapter 12, you see a man who had what I would call me-itis. He had the idea that the stuff that he was in possession of, he owned. And so you look there in Luke chapter 12 and you start in verse 16. And you see Jesus saying, then he spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will these things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Now, as you look at that, you see that this man has lots of wealth, and so much that the barns that he has just are simply not big enough, and he wants to build bigger ones. But let's read that text and emphasize the personal pronouns. Notice what he says. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods, and I will say to my soul, you see what he's got? He's got the problem that he thinks the possessions that are in his control are his. The fact of the matter is the Bible explains to us that we are stewards, that we don't keep the things that God entrusts us with while we're here on this planet, and that when we leave this planet, we came in with nothing, we'll go out with nothing, and God entrusts certain amounts of financial resources to us while we are here, and we are called upon to use those resources in a way that the steward, the owner, would approve of. And so who is the owner? Of course, God. Well, when you look at some other verses about ownership and God having possession of everything, probably one of the most famous is there in Psalm 50. You turn to Psalm 50 and you read a statement that is very familiar to lots of us as it relates to ownership. Psalm 50 says, God speaking, verse 9, I will not take a bull from your house, nor goats out of your folds, for every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the mountains, and the wild beasts of the field are mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine, and all its fullness. The world is mine and all its fullness. When God says that He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. You know, I live in Middle Tennessee, and there are some beautiful rolling hills. And in the spring and the summer, those rolling hills have beautiful green grass. And probably one of my favorite pictures of Middle Tennessee is a beautiful rolling hill with a small herd of about 25 or 30 black Angus cows on it. And you can just see this picture with me. You're driving down one of the state routes and you look over and there's that field of green grass and there are those beautiful black Angus cows, and maybe they're standing up on the side of a hill, and down in the valley there's a barn, and that's a red barn, and in front of that red barn there's a F-150 truck, and you're looking at that little farm and you ask yourself the question, who owns that? Well, you are tempted to think the guy who owns the truck is probably the farmer, and he owns the truck, and he owns the barn, and he owns the land, and he owns the cows. Do you think when the Bible says that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, that that is a hill or a herd of cows that nobody else claims ownership to? That God is only saying He owns the ones that aren't already spoken for? Well, no, you know exactly what that text is saying. That text is saying that God owns all cows on every hill. And those 30 black Angus cows belong to God, and the hill belongs to God, and the grass belongs to God, and incidentally, so does the barn, and so does the F-150 truck, and all of that is God's. You see, the understanding of stewardship helps us to realize that we are people who are using God's possessions. Now, you and I understand stewardship being very important, I think. I think most of us do some banking. And if we were to go to a bank and this bank didn't understand the principle of stewardship, I think we'd be rather angry about it. You go down to a bank and you open a bank account and you decide you're going to deposit, $1,000. And so you do. You put $1,000 into your new bank account and you go away and you come back in a week and you decide you want to make a withdrawal. And you've decided you want to withdraw $300 and you go up to the window and you fill out the little piece of paper, or you just say, I'd like to withdraw $300 from my account. Here's my account number. And the teller looks at you with a smile on her face and she says, that would be good. I would like to be able to do that for you. But when you brought the money in here, we assumed it was ours. And so we just treated it like it was ours. Did you see the renovations in the foyer here of the bank? We used your money, at least most of it, to do the renovations of the bank. I think we've got about $50 left of your $1,000. Here, I'll give you that $50, and I hope you have a nice day. How would that go over with you? If you had someone that was supposed to understand stewardship and the idea that they didn't own whatever it was you had entrusted them with, but then they acted like they owned it. And you see, the rich fool's problem was he was just acting like all of the possessions that he had control over were his. And he had forgotten to direct his attention to the real owner. And then you go to Psalm 50 and you see that the text is explaining to us that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. That means every cow on every hill and every barn and every truck. And until we understand the idea of stewardship, well, we just simply won't understand the joy of giving back, because we'll be thinking that somehow someone's taking something of ours from us and it's not fair and we should get to keep. But it was never ours anyway. And the interesting thing about this idea of giving, which we'll get into later, is that you can't keep it, but you can send it on ahead. That the only value that it actually has is when you give it away. And so this idea of stewardship, this idea of you are holding on to something, you're using something for the benefit of the real owner, well, that is probably one of the most foundational principles as it relates to this idea of giving. Now, let's look at a passage that I think is very, very helpful with this. We go to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 8. And when you go to the book of Deuteronomy chapter 8, you see Moses talking to the Israelites about what's going to happen soon. Deuteronomy is written in the last year, in the last month before the Israelites go into the Promised Land. And Moses is painting an amazing picture of what the Israelites are going to enjoy in the Promised Land. And it looks very, very neat. You look right there in about verse 7, and Moses says, "For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs that flow out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you can dig copper." Well, sounds like a very exciting place, and certainly to the Israelites who had, they've been wandering around in the wilderness for the last 40 years. And they're going to go into a land where streams of cool, drinkable water are plentiful in the area, and they're going to have wells that they didn't dig, and that well is going to produce good drinking water, and they're going to be eating fruit off of fruit trees that they didn't plant. They're going to be living in houses that they didn't build. Lots of times I like to stop right there and just ask the question, when these children of Israel moved into the Promised Land, were they more financially prosperous than you and I are? Did they have the things that we have? What's interesting to me is that if you were to take just a standard person in the United States of America, most of us, we can walk into our house, and if we want it 72 degrees, we can hit a button, and that button will allow us to adjust the air temperature in our house to exactly 72 degrees. Did the children of Israel have anything like that? No, they certainly didn't. And then if we want some ice, we can go to our refrigerator, and lots of us have a cup that we can stick into the little ice dispenser there, and it will shoot out ice. And if we don't like the ice shape, then we can get it crushed. And then we can just move over to another little water dispenser, and we can put that cup there, and it will pour in cold water. And now we have ice water that we've gotten in, 20 seconds. Did the children of Israel have anything like that, even when they moved into the Promised Land? It says that you'll eat bread without scarcity. We have an Aldi close to our house, and you can go into the Aldi and get whole wheat bread, full loaf of it, for $1.15. There's never been a day in my life where I haven't been in a position to eat as much bread as I want to eat. What about you? I'd say most of us, as we're looking at these children of Israel moving into the Promised Land, we think, wow, that's great, but if you were to sit the richest Israelite on a pew beside any one of us and just say financially, physically, which of these two people has more at their disposal, more food, more physical wealth, it's us every time. Now, these people are going into the Promised Land, and we're looking at many of us being far more wealthy than these children of Israel in the Promised Land. And there's a temptation to think, maybe we should feel guilty about the money we have. Maybe we should feel bad that we have been given so much financial prosperity, etc. Well, the fact of the matter is that's never been God's attitude toward money and financial prosperity, etc. And he explains that to the children of Israel. He says, I'm bringing you into a land where you're going to eat bread without scarcity. You're going to have as much water as you can possibly need. You're going to have fruit trees that you get to eat off of on a regular basis, houses that you didn't build, wells that you didn't dig. And then he says, when you have eaten and are full, then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. If you have the financial prosperity to go into a restaurant and to eat a delicious meal, then God is not saying you should feel bad or guilty about that. God is saying that when you are blessed with financial prosperity, you should remember where it comes from. You should thank God that you have that. And then the next part of the text says, beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, and statutes, which I command you today. And you look at verse 7 and you ask yourself, well, how would they forget the Lord their God when he brought them into the promised land? Now notice what it says in verse 17. Then you say in your heart, my power and my might of my hand have gained me this wealth. You see, that's how you forget the Lord. You say that you have it because of your efforts or your abilities or your power or your might. And then verse 18, and you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers as it is this day. You know, I think it's tempting for a lot of us to think about money in a way that is not productive. You know, a lot of people say, well, hold on just a second, preacher. I've got money because I've worked hard for that money. Now, the Bible talks to us about working hard for our money, that if a man doesn't work, then he shouldn't eat. The book of Proverbs talks about laziness and sloth. Absolutely. It is a fact that you'll have more money if you work harder than you would if you didn't. But we don't have money because we work hard. Here's what I mean by that. I have been overseas to places where there are people who will get up at the crack of dawn and they will go out to a tiny little parcel of land and they will scrape on that parcel of land for 8, 10, 12 hours until it gets dark. And then when it gets dark, they'll go home and sew their own clothes and make their own shoes, and they'll do that 6 or 7 days a week. And in the course of their life, they will earn, in the course of their life, less than most of us in the United States of America will earn in a month. Now, they'll work harder than we're working. They're not working 8-hour days, 5 days a week. You're talking about 10, 12, 13, 14, 16 hours a day for 6 or 7 days a week, and they'll make $3,000 their whole life. Now, why is that? Because God has put us in a position where our labor is more financially prosperous than theirs. Now, what we'll see is that lots of times that's going to be an added spiritual burden to people who have financial wealth and prosperity, that Jesus says it's going to be hard for a rich person to get into heaven, and that we're going to have to focus and concentrate on making sure we control our money and we don't let money control us or control God's money that he's allowed us to use. But we don't have money because we work hard. You know, another person says, well, hold on just a second. Preacher, I think about money and I have wisely invested my money, and the reason that I've got money is because I've wisely invested it. You know, you think about that, and it sounds good to start out with, but then you think about Job, who was a hard worker and a wise investor. He had invested his money in, it looked like things that at that time would have made a person financially prosperous. He had thousands and thousands of head of sheep and oxen and cattle, and in one day he lost everything. Now, the day after he lost everything, was he less wise of an investor than he was the day before? No, certainly not. Why did he lose everything? Because it's God's possessions. They're God's possessions. It's God's stuff. And when God wants to take it back or wants to allow it to be gone, God can, regardless of how hard of a worker we are, regardless of how wise of an investor we are. You know, another person might say, yeah, preacher, but I'm frugal. I really watch how I spend money. There are a lot of people that go out and waste their money doing all kinds of other stuff, but I watch my money. You know, some people are so frugal that they'll take the Ziploc bags that they use and they'll rinse them out and turn them inside out and dry them. Seen that? Hey, if you do that, chances are, if you're frugal, then you'll probably have more money than you would if you weren't frugal. But you don't have money because you're frugal. You know, I've seen there again in places where I've been, where I have done mission work and some things, I've seen a person that will find a used tire on the side of the road. It will be a blown out tire. And they will take that tire home and they will have their whole family come, all of the feet that'll fit on that tire, and they'll get the pattern for their children's bottom of their feet and their bottom of their feet, and then they'll cut that rubber out and they'll tie something like a hay bale twine on it, and they'll have flip-flops that they'll literally wear until the rubber wears out of those. You ever picked up an old tire on the side of the road and made shoes out of it? I was in one place where we had water bottles because the drinking water wasn't, you couldn't drink the water that was there, and so we packed in all of our water in bottles, and we'd drink the water, and then we'd throw the bottle away. Well, as we started going around to the houses in the village, we saw all of our used water bottles being used as the fine china for the local community that was digging through our trash. You know, are you that frugal? You going to dig through somebody else's trash and use their used water bottle as your fine china? Well, I'm not. See, here's the point. You're not wealthy, or you don't have the money that you have because you're a hard worker, because you're a wise investor, because you happen to be very frugal. Those are all good things, not downplaying those at all. But the reason you have any money that you've got is because God has given you the power to get it. And it's God's stuff. And God can take it back anytime that He wants to. Until we recognize that God is the owner of everything. Well, that's the foundational truth upon which all stewardship is built, that we're just here using God's stuff for a little while. Like I said, you understand if a person that you're interacting with doesn't grasp this idea. Maybe you have a college kid that's going to be a house sitter for you for the summer while you go somewhere, and that college kid comes in and you've explained, hey, just water these plants, etc. But the college kid comes in and says, I don't really like this wall. I think I'm going to take this wall out. Then I don't like the colors of this house. I think I'm going to repaint the house. And I've always liked carpet instead of hardwood floors. So I think I'm going to put some carpet down. And so you come back to your house that the college student is supposed to be house sitting, and you're missing 3 or 4 walls. It's a psychedelic blue, and it's got carpet instead of your hardwoods. And, well, they just didn't understand the principle of stewardship. Years ago when I was at Freed-Hardeman, one of the professors really understood this principle, and he had a truck, and lots of times when your freshmen would move in, they would need some type of truck to get their sofas and big chairs and things into their dorms. And so it was known that you could go to this particular professor, and he would let you use the truck. But it was reported that when you went to ask him for the truck, he would say, sure, I'd be happy to let you use the truck, but just got to warn you, it's not my truck. And their eyes would get kind of big, and they would wonder why he's letting them use a truck that's not his. And he would give them the keys and say, it's God's truck. Oh, they would say, oh, okay. And then he would say, but need to warn you also that God doesn't like dents and scratches. Well, I don't know what God thinks about dents and scratches, but I do know what God thinks about that attitude of being a steward and recognizing God's ownership. And that is what we are going to be really focusing on as we come to the realization that it's more blessed to give than to receive. Well, one of the central principles of that is that God owns it all.
All right, so most of you know anyways how much we love Kyle Butt, and I would prefer him just to teach it all if we could get him here every night. Every Wednesday night, but in his stead, we'll do our best to use these videos. This comes with the material as well with the license, so if you would like to watch it again, or if we don't watch all of one and you'd like a copy of the lesson, then I can send you the links to the Vimeo site where they are, and you can watch more of them. But I do just think some of you would probably like to come here on Wednesday night and just turn the lights down low and maybe take a nap through it. We can just watch videos. Some of you say, well, I don't want to watch video. I'd rather have discussion. So we'll try to thread the needle of doing both. Through most of these lessons and watch maybe some of it. Once again, I love Kyle. You can't beat him telling the stories and his delivery on things, and it was not too long tonight, and so we're just going to watch all of it to introduce. If you have your notebook there in front of you, just a few things to point out in the time we have left tonight. The foreword in particular, I want to give credit, of course, where credit is due. The very last page, hopefully, and again, I think I've run 3,000 pages of copies today, so if you're missing something, it's more than likely true, and we'll get you a copy of it. But the very last page hopefully talks about the two authors. You're familiar with Kyle and his work on many things, and then Brent Spicer, who is an elder or been a member there at Spring Meadows for many years, do a great job with this. But in the foreword, Brother Dale Jenkins does the kind of introduction there, and he tells the fact that a lot of the material they're using comes from Brother V.P. Black. And some of you may have heard Brother V.P.'s Black material before. Dale talks about the fact there, he says, I don't remember the first time I heard him quote Psalm 50, the cattle on 1,000 hills. And his book, I think, was maybe My God and My Money or something like that, was a book that he had. I meant to go in there and see if we had it in the library. We may or may not have a copy of it, but it was the material that people would use for years. And so what this is, and I think it's got a date on it of 2020 towards the front, that Kyle and Brent began to work on this and put this together. And so we're thankful that the elders were willing to help us buy the license. And again, we have PDFs of this. We can get to you, send you a copy of the length of the videos, and we'll just try to work our way through it here and think about the joy of generosity. Several things he said, I don't want to rehash it all, but the idea of, have you ever stopped on the side of the road to pick up a used tire? Have you ever dug water bottles out of the trash can? We don't have to do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think if he could elaborate on that, he would say you're not trying to make you feel bad that you're able to use things and then dispose of them. But we understand, though, that we are truly, truly blessed people. And it's not because we have been, better, that we are holier than people in third world countries or anything like that. But we are just in a position to be in we usually say it, the most blessed nation in the world. Some of the most blessed people ever to live on the face of the planet. And I was interested in some of my notes that I mentioned or wrote down, made a note about. The main passage he discussed tonight was not 1 Corinthians. We usually go to 1 Corinthians. We usually go to Acts chapter 20, and he did mention that, the quote from Jesus there that Paul gives. But he used Deuteronomy chapter 8. For people who had nothing, he still encouraged them that even if you have very little, you need to be a good steward of that. And so it's encouraging to go back and think about Deuteronomy chapter 8 and that entire chapter there that he mentioned, the idea that they had very little, even though they had it really good. At that point, they're going to have it really good, and yet they need to be good stewards of that. And how much more we've been blessed through this life, and we need to be thankful for it. And remember, the question for the first chapter, if you turn there, is stewardship, whose money is it? Now, if you have your notebook there and you turn to page number 1, you'll notice, just to point out a few things, that the entire first page almost is another illustration or story. So I'll challenge you as you come in each week. This is lesson 1. We're not going to go through most of the lesson in the notebook, but you can go back and look over it through the rest of the week, and then go ahead if you want to and look at chapter 2. Because as you see with that illustration there, about a quarter of the chapter in your booklet, he didn't even touch that story of the wrestlers there, and Rulon Gardner. So, some of it will be covered because on page number 3, I had underlined in my notes right there in the middle, we're only blessed, or we only have the money because God has placed you in a position where your labor is more financially prosperous. And that was the last point he drove home. And then certainly the rich fool there at the bottom of page 3, and then over on to page 4. It's kind of funny. We want to laugh about it, but we won't go around the room and ask you what you would do if you showed up at the bank and they said they had used your money, right? All we have left is this little bit. We used it for something else. We thought that would be okay with you. Is it not okay that we used your money? You just gave it to us. And yet sometimes that's the way we treat these things. And when we think about our money, and being a good steward, it's something that we need to consider. So there are some discussion questions there, and maybe even some fill-in-the-blank kind of things to go along with it, possibly at the end of each chapter. And so we'll do our best maybe to ask some of those and to look at them. But as you can see, certainly in a similar way to what Freddie has on Sunday morning, we've got a lot of material to get through, and so it will be beneficial to you if you'll try to look at it a little bit and come in with some understanding of what the chapter is going to be about. We'll watch part of the video each week, and then try to go from there. The plan, of course, would be to just cover a chapter a week. It's not one of those things with our constraints that we want to spill over into multiple weeks and not get done. So that's why it's definitely beneficial if you work through it on your own, and maybe come prepared with any questions you might have if there's anything that comes up in your study, and we'll certainly try to answer those things. 2 other things real quick as we don't have much time tonight. I was struck by the comment that he made that we say a lot of times, you can't take it with you. You can't take it with you. You just return to the earth and the dust, and you can't take it with you. But he said you can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead. And we would do wise to think about that idea, that what we do with what we have here, in a sense, we're sending it ahead. We're storing up treasure in heaven, as the passage says. And so not only that, but the other one was that money has the most value when you give it away. when you give it away. It's healthier. It makes you feel good. We don't think about that. And I make jokes about Kyle and letting Kyle do the lesson, but we do. We always talk about money and giving, and we talk about it from a spiritual perspective, with the preacher preaching it with an apologetic attitude. I'm sorry we have to do this. The elders just gave the budget, but I'll tell you this, we don't have any capital projects coming up right now. The elders didn't put forth that, hey, we need to raise, $5,000 or $10,000 more dollars this year. I think now's the time to do that stewardship class. No, we will always, they will always take the money that you give and try to be wise with it and do what they can. But we're not trying to raise funds. The preacher's not looking for a raise. There's not anything in particular that's causing us to do this, other than I think it's very challenging. And I hope that you'll see that through this, through these chapters. And when you think about it, as he said, what usually happens is the preacher preaches on it one Sunday and then we move on. This will be a whole quarter, 13 weeks to study it together. And I have gone through this before, but I think it is very, very good for us to keep in mind. And that really begins with this idea that it all belongs to God. If we'll think about our stuff that way, then I think that it will help us, hopefully be better givers. But it's not just that. Again, kind of that idea of, the church is just looking for money. It's not just about asking you to give more. It's about asking us to be good stewards of what we have. Let me say it again. Of what you have. Do you make $10,000 a year? Do you make 40? Do you make 80? It doesn't really matter to an extent. What do you have? With whatever it is that you've been blessed with, what are you willing to do with that? We'll talk a little bit about tithing. We'll talk a little about some of those things that are, promoted or people promote in a lot of different ways. What the Bible says about those kinds of things. We'll try to kind of come at it from several different angles. And feel free to look ahead, to think about each lesson each week, and to come prepared to have some discussion and offer up some of those things. Any comments or questions tonight about anything that he mentioned or anything that you've been thinking about so far? Yeah. And I think my point to that is so back to what I was saying a second ago, we're not trying to shame anybody because it's what you have. They're doing with what they have, and just because we live here doesn't mean you should be ashamed for that, or that you should go home tonight and offer to give $10,000 to some poor country. We're not saying that. But that we simply do with what we have, and absolutely that's the case. I don't know how many of you have been out of the country, or certainly like a third world country on a mission trip or anything like that, but it usually does challenge us. But I think we even said this a few weeks ago in our Wednesday night class. We've talked about our stuff and things like that with our How Do You Handle series a couple of times. We said, it's just simply being a good steward of whatever it might be that comes your way. So I think that's true. Anybody else here? Yeah, absolutely. You'll notice as well in the forward on I don't even know if it has a page number at the bottom of it. I was trying to look through here, but there it says one of Freddie's favorite quotes: "When our people know better, they will do better." How many times has Freddie said that over the years? The challenge here is just to think about these things a little differently than maybe we have before. He said at the beginning of the lesson, it's life changing. And as he tried to promote the idea from studies and things, it can make you feel better. It can make you healthier. Because you think about the way we do treat sometimes, missionaries who report on mission work and those kinds of things. It's kind of like, and it's, the elders will tell you it's difficult because there's lots of people who are in need. And so we, treat it apologetically. But it should make us feel better to do those kinds of things and help us in this life to begin to get a grasp of exactly how God thinks about it, what Scripture has to say about it. And again, the title is The Joy of Generosity. That's not just in giving to the church, the work of the church, although that is a part of it, but being a good steward of what we have and then just giving in general, I would say, being a giving kind of person. It will be life-changing. It will help you to feel better, and it will certainly help you on a spiritual level as well. So that's kind of the plan. If you know somebody that's not here and you want to grab them, there's still several up here. I printed about 70 for tonight. We'll hold off on printing some until we try to get all these gone. But if you find something missing or need something else, let us know. And again, we may try to find a way to get you a link to these videos. But if you're interested in watching again or something like that, then let me know. And they were just kind of emailed to me, all 13 links, and we can share them with you. So appreciate your attention tonight. We'll pick up there with lesson 2 then next week.
this evening. If you have any needs if you're a teacher, with our new program, our new classes going on now, if you have any needs in this little old notebook or notepad, whatever you call it is, what do you call this thing? Clipboard. Clipboard. Old-timey clipboard here. We didn't even have them when I was in school. It's so modern. But anyhow, you can come down there and sign up for what you need, and it'll be purchased for you, and you can be using it for sure. In the resource room, which is the room right in there with the resources. Also, of course, we sent out on one call that Pam's aunt passed away, and her funeral, that's Christine Loveday. Her funeral's going to be tomorrow at 12 o'clock at Main Street Congregation in Crossville, and visitation will be prior to the funeral there at the building as well from 10 to 12. So keep that family in your prayers. Talk to Mary. Mary says she's really having a hard time. Her back is what's giving her the most problem right now, Mary Cookston. So she says she really needs our prayers that she might be able to maneuver better than she presently is, for sure. Don't forget, of course, little Susanna and her continued getting better. We're desirous of. Greg Pickett, for sure, going to be having surgery. After all this time, just getting him the okay to do the surgery is a big deal. So hopefully that'll take care of some of his problems anyhow. Of course, Gene Ross and treatments that he's taking and doing everything they can to remedy the situation he's in, the longevity of his life. So let's certainly continue to remember all of them. Do not forget to remember we're going to try to fill the refrigerator and the freezer of the Boyd family. If you have any questions about that or donations to make, give that to Dana Loudermilk for sure. Also, of course, we mentioned Jerry Douglas had a birthday on Monday. Faye is suffering with a toe problem that makes it difficult for her to walk. And I'm not sure if they got to a doctor or what, but that's probably where they're at tonight. Also, Laura Hicks and Carol Ann Davis will be celebrating a birthday tomorrow. And then Tracy Smith will be celebrating a birthday on Friday, the 10th. So happy birthday to all of these. We also mentioned Claudine, her daughter-in-law, Pansy Birch, who's Paul's wife, has MS. And she's been really going down here lately quite a bit. And as a matter of fact, they couldn't do anything else for her at Vanderbilt. And so she's going to be going tomorrow to Emory to hopefully get some benefit. Her address will be in the bulletin on Sunday. And her and Paul, of course, both are area members of the church. So let's put our best foot forward and let them know that we're concerned with them, and maybe good will come from our efforts to brighten their day. We have a nice card here, counting blessings, feeling grateful. Dunlap Church of Christ, sending thanks. Thank you so much for the wonderful fruit basket that you all sent. The church is always so thoughtful in giving. Yours in Christ, Herschel and Darlene Powell. And of course, that's Sandra's mother and father. And then Happy New Year. So thankful for that. Is there anything I've overlooked that needs? Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Was it yesterday or today? Yesterday, David Payton, preacher down at Lafayette, who'd been suffering with Lou Gehrig's disease for quite some time, passed away. And so certainly remember that family as well. Anybody else?
I got more.
All right.
I know everybody's aware of the fires that are out in California, but I saw on Facebook today from a brother that said that there are 2 congregations of Lord's Church that have lost their buildings already. So we're thinking about them and praying for them, pray for relief out there from those fires.
Well, mate, 2 church buildings of our brethren have gone up in smoke, so let's certainly remember them too. Anybody else? Anything else? Don't forget, just around the corner next week, our Youth Day. Look forward to having a good time with that, and good speakers. We'll have good singing. Let's do our part to get as many young people and old people here as we possibly can for that wonderful opportunity. If there's nothing else, then who has our closing prayer? Ian's got our closing prayer. Let's be standing.
Number 77 in the purple book. 77 in the purple book. I am a sheep. I am a sheep and the Lord is my shepherd, watching over my soul to keep guarding over me ever, watching wherever I go. And when the winds blow, He is my shelter. When I'm lost and alone, He rescues me. And when the light comes, He is my victory, constantly watching over me. He is constantly watching over me. We are His children and He is our Father, watching over our soul. Great is His love for His sons and His daughters, watching wherever we go. And when the winds blow, He is my shelter. When I'm lost and alone, He rescues me. And when the light comes, He is my victory, constantly watching over me. He is constantly watching over me. Would you pray with me? Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day that you have blessed us with. Thank you for a beauty that we would get to wake up to another day of life. Thank you for the breath that's within our bones. Help us to be grateful for the things that we have. Thank you for this heat that we have in this building, that we could stay warm from the elements. Thank you for those things we sometimes take for granted. Help us to use the lessons that we learned today and apply them to our lives as we strive to be better Christians each and every day. Help us to walk in your truth and allow you to guide our lives through your word. Please help those who are battling with various forms of illness, and all those, especially those mentioned of this congregation, and those who are spiritually sick as well. Help those who've recently lost loved ones to be comforted in your word. And please keep us in your loving hand. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.